This is my 64th video on my work with OO gauge. See part 1 of this series for my reasons for getting into OO gauge when I already had a lot invested in working in N gauge, and I didn't really have space available for a large, fully operational OO gauge layout. Also see my lengthy series on my N gauge railway modelling for smaller and more complex scenery and smaller scale trains running. This part is the 38th, dealing with my third layout made using mainly Hornby EZ Track. See the prior video, part 27, for my reasons for wanting to try a Hornby EZ Track layout when I already had an OO gauge layout using Bachmann EZ Track. This part isn't really much about the layout. It's about a Dapol Royal Scot locomotive that I bought, basically the same as Mainline. The fixes that I had to do to get the loco running, including replacing the drive axle gear, and the mutation of the loco from one Royal Scot to another via renumbering and replating. This wasn't an easy ride. There were quite a few difficulties along the way, and I'll try to review the whole process here, although I didn't shoot as much video and as many pictures as I might have, as I got rather embroiled in the struggle at times. The whole process started when I made this purchase on eBay. This set, a Royal Scot locomotive and 3 LMS mainline coaches, was offered for sale from the USA. I'm in Canada, so buying from the USA is generally more economical for me than buying from the UK, which I nevertheless often have to do since I'm modelling British operations, specifically LMS operations in the 1930s. Anyway, this set was offered for $69.95 US, with no guarantees as to its running. I didn't really need it, as I already had a mainline Royal Scot locomotive and 2 Bachmann examples of the class, but on the other hand I'm probably more interested in the original Royal Scot class than in any other. Apart from anything else, it's a class that I know my grandfather, my dad's dad, drove, and also in some ways it's the quintessential representation of the heyday of the LMS. True, Stanley's great classes exemplify the power of the LMS in the 1930s, with a legacy going on basically until the end of steam on British railways. But the Royal Scot class were born, I think you'd have to say, with a dollop of luck in the earliest days of the LMS, and did fine work on the Premier Expresses until Stanley's classes arrived and took over. Now, I also wouldn't dispute that the rebuilding of the Royal Scot class made them into better running locomotives, but the rebuilding didn't start until the 1940s, after the period I'm modelling, and after my granddad had retired. So for me, the relevant Royal Scots are the original unrebuilt engines of the 20s and 30s. And I'm a little sad that the rebuilding was so successful that every single example of the class was rebuilt by the mid-1950s, and none survive in the original condition. Anyway, I went ahead and bought this set, as for the price it was almost worth it just for the coaches, and I figured that I should be able to do something with the locomotive as a project. This is the locomotive that was included, 6127, the Old Contemptibles, originally named Novelty and renamed in 1936. I actually already had a mainline example of the Old Contemptibles in good condition, as it was professionally serviced by Nigel Doran of British Model Trains in Cambridge, Ontario, from whom I bought it. So I was thinking right from the start of changing the identity of this purchase. As a note, so far as I can tell, the Dapol versions of the Royal Scot were essentially identical to the mainline examples. Later, Bachmann took over this model, and whilst Bachmann retained the same basic body modelling and also retained the split chassis, they did make some substantial changes to the mechanism. The mainline and Dapol versions use a Ringfield motor embedded in the chassis and driving the wheels via rather poor plastic gears, whereas Bachmann switched to a can motor with a worm gear, and the drive gear on the axle became much more substantial and more satisfactory. When I received this example, I found that indeed it basically did not run. The motor pretty much ran fine, but there were several other problems. Initially, when power was applied, the wheels just shifted a little and then stopped, whilst the motor continued to turn. There were essentially 2 problems. Firstly, someone had put the motion brackets together wrongly when reassembling the loco. There are 2 brackets, one on each side, and they're supposed to fit onto pins on the chassis. But in this case, for some reason, someone had got the bracket detached from the chassis on one side, and had then stopped it from moving around by gluing it to the body. Rather a bodge, but they hadn't used particularly robust glue, fortunately, and I was able to detach the bracket from the body and reattach it to the chassis as was intended. However, this really didn't go very far towards making the loco run. Actually, it did result in the loco running for a few inches along the track, but then it would again get stuck and just spin its motor without moving. Taking the base plate off the chassis, it was clear that this was because the plastic drive gear on the driven axle was badly worn, and was able to shift over to the point where only its worn-away edge was overlapping the gear passing drive from the motor. As a temporary fix, I was able to get the loco going by putting in a shim beside the gear on the driven axle, so that the gear couldn't shift over and its non-worn portion would stay engaged with the gear passing drive from the motor. With this shim in place, I could actually get the loco to run round the layout without any slipping of the gears. However, this clearly wasn't an ideal solution, as it put more friction into a system that was already less than satisfactory, and in any case not much was left on the axle gear in the way of sound teeth. So I looked to replace the gear. Peter's Spares sell a set to replace the plastic axle parts of these locos, including the driven gear, and the price as such is not unreasonable, £5.99 I believe. But the problem for me was that Peters charge £40 for shipping to Canada, making it completely prohibitive to buy the parts from them. I could buy a whole new loco like this for less. So I asked Nigel with British Model Trains if he could help me. I knew he did a lot of servicing and repairs, and I thought that he might well have something on hand that would help me with my problem. In fact, I sent this picture to Nigel, and he replied that yes, he could provide me with replacement axle parts for this chassis. In fact, I ended up buying a set of the Peters Spares parts from Nigel for $18 Canadian. Meanwhile, I went ahead with working to change the identity of the loco. I needed to renumber and rename it. I decided to go with 6121, a slightly unusual example of the original Royal Scot class. This loco, from the time it went into service in 1928, bore plates that simply read HLI. This represented Highland Light Infantry, so it was effectively like others of the class named after a regiment, but its plate just said HLI from 1928 until 1949, when it received new plates with the name Highland Light Infantry City of Glasgow Regiment. So for all of the period that I modelled, the loco carried the HLI nameplates. I ordered a set of HLI etched plates from Fox Transfers. I also ordered from Fox a set of water slide decals for LMS loco numbers in the 1930s. However, when those arrived, the numbers were quite a bit smaller than the numbers on my loco body. On the other hand, I had some Hmrs press fix decals for numbers basically the same size. I wasn't too sure how to do the renumbering. I found that I was able to rub off the numbers on the body without rubbing off the underlying crimson paint if I just rubbed gently with the side of a pair of tweezers. Meanwhile, I took the drive axle apart in order to be sure that I should be able to fit a new gear. The crank pins are seen at top left here. They were simply a push fit rather than screwed in, and they were quite tricky to pull out. The wheels were also just a push fit onto the gear axle, with round pins, which was good news as the Peters Spares set is specifically designed for the earlier round-pinned wheels. Later wheels switched to square pins for more positive engagement, but the Peters Spares parts wouldn't work with those. The old worn gear is at bottom left, and the shim I used for my temporary fix at right. The little screws at top are those that attach the chassis base plate. Having removed a number by rubbing with the edge of my tweezers, I was able to use a cotton bud to polish up the paint so you could hardly see where the number had been taken off. I also needed to remove the special old Contemptibles plates. These were made of plastic and very firmly glued in place. I essentially just tore them off with pliers, but it was rather a messy process, damaging the paint on the splashers and leaving parts of the tabs from the plates still on the loco, but I didn't really know what else to do. I damaged the paint even more on the other side. I did my best to clean up and to file down the remaining tabs so that the new plates could be glued on top of them. Here's the other side after initial cleanup. The Fox plate set is at top left. The set comes with brass plates for the sides of the loco, plus etched steel plates for the smokebox door, giving the loco running number in both LMS and BR versions. Also seen here are the Hmrs press-fix transfers that I decided to use. Initially, I tried just replacing the 7 of the original number with a 1 from the press-fix set, which would have been nice. It's rather fiddly positioning the individual digits. Until you press it down firmly, the slightest breath or touch will send the digits skittering away. Having applied 1 digit, it was clear that I wasn't going to be able to get away with just replacing the 7s with 1s. The press-fix digits turned out to be a bright yellow, whilst the original numbers were a dull gold. So I went ahead and removed the remainder of the original digits and got ready to replace all of the digits from the press-fix set. The number's probably a bit too bright, and the numbers aren't perfectly aligned, but this was the best that I could do. I went on to do the same process on the other side, replacing each digit of the original number with digits from the press-fix set. Here's that second side done. The digits are probably even worse aligned than on the first side. I also repainted the splashers under where the plates were to go. I used Model Master British Crimson enamel paint with just a little black mixed in to better match it to the rest of the loco. And don't get me started on the subject of the LMS Crimson Lake colour. I should perhaps do a whole video on that at some point. The Fox plates are well made, but I have to admit that I struggle to work with them. Separating them from the frame that they come in is far from easy. When I got my first set, not this set, for another loco I did long ago, a while ago anyway, I made the mistake of trying to cut the plates from the frame using a sharp knife on my cutting mat, and that was a bad idea. The mat gives slightly as you press down with the knife, and that causes the plates to bend. It may crack the colouring on the plates, and even if it doesn't, getting the plates straight again won't be easy. So how can the plates be cut from the frame? Well, my best suggestions are either to use very accurate snippers of some kind, or to cut with a sharp knife against a surface that won't give at all, such as stone or steel. In this case, I cut on top of a steel ruler, but then it's still very difficult to completely remove the attachment pieces from the plates. Here's one plate glued in place, using CA and some very awkward fiddling. Here's the other plate in place, as best as I could do it. The steel plate for the smoke box was even trickier. As it was steel, I wasn't able to cut it out with a knife, no matter how hard I tried. So I ended up cutting it out with nail clippers and a lot of force. I think the white showing at the end of the plate is actually CA glue that's got on top. I tried to blacken that with a touch of black paint. Then I did some repairing of the crimson paint on the splashers again. You can see here the enamel paints that I used. I just took a little of the crimson and mixed it on a lid with just a touch of black. Then I used a gold Sharpie to approximate some lining on the splashers. Here's the other side after my best efforts with the splasher. I picked up the parts for the axles when I met Nigel of British Model Trains at a train show, the first local one since the pandemic. This is the set that is available from Peter's Spares, specially manufactured for them, I believe. This set will fit all of the Mainline LMS 460s, and as noted, it appears that Dapol sold these models exactly as Mainline made them. Here's the new gear on the right with the old worn gear on the left. As a direct replacement, the new gear is still basically a poor design. Only time will tell how the new gear will wear. You can see on the old gear at left how far the sleeves on the wheels pushed onto the gear's axle. The new gear fitted into the chassis okay and engaged with the drive gear from the motor perfectly. However, fitting the wheels to the new gear was a devil of a job. The wheels need to be quartered, of course, meaning that the connections for the connecting rods need to be offset by 90 degrees from one wheel to the other. Then the crank pins need to be reinserted. It was very difficult to push these firmly home without applying force to delicate parts and damaging them. I put the base plate back on and tried the drive on the bench. The wheels appeared to turn fine. So I put the body back on. And the loco appeared finished, although obviously there could still be cosmetic issues that could be addressed. However, more significantly, the thing wouldn't run at all on the tracks. The main issue was the gauging of the wheels on the drive axle. I had pushed the wheels onto the new gear as firmly as I could, but they were still much too far apart, something like 15.5 millimeters back to back when it should be 14.4. That was enough to completely prevent the loco from getting round even third radius curves, to say nothing of going over points. Getting the gauging right was extremely hard. The wheels just didn't want to push far enough onto the new axle. I would push a wheel on, then take it off, and it would have made a ridge in the plastic of the axle, still much too close to the end for proper gauging. So I filed off the ridge and pushed the wheel on again as hard as I could, and it made another ridge a bit further down, which I again filed off. I had to repeat this process 4 or 5 times for each wheel before I could get them to push on far enough to get the gauging about right. 14.5 millimeters was the best I could do, but that should be close enough. I tried the chassis on the layout again, without bothering to put the body on, just to see if the wheels could now run on the tracks. The chassis did run okay, all round curves and over points, but it made a horrible screeching noise as it ran. So I had it back on the bench to see what I could do about that. My first thought was that maybe the new gear was making noise engaging with the gear from the motor. I hadn't lubricated it, and I probably should have. I had the base plate off, of course, and I put a touch of molly grease all round the teeth on the new gear. However, that actually did nothing to reduce the screeching when I powered the chassis on the bench again. So then I took the base plate off again and put a little gear oil into where the axles ran in the chassis, a crude arrangement. There's no proper bearings. The axles are just dropped into square holes in the chassis. However, putting gear oil on there still didn't stop the screeching. I had earlier taken the motor apart and cleaned the brushes and the commutator, but I couldn't remember if I lubed the motor when I did that. So my next step was to lube the commutator shaft where it ran in the holes at either end with a little gear oil, and also to apply tiny drops of gear oil to each of the bearing points of the conrods and the valve gear, and also to where the shafts ran in the cylinders. That did it. The screeching finally went away. I don't know whether it was the motor or the valve gear, but the screeching went away after that round of lubrication. So now, a little video of the chassis running on the layout after that lubrication. So, I had a lot of trouble getting this to run. I had trouble getting the wheels gauged properly, considerable trouble. I still don't trust the crank pins. If you're just pushing crank pins, I don't really trust them to be pushed in. Wouldn't surprise me if the crank pins fall out. I've done my best to push them in. But the other problem with it was making a horrible shrieking noise when I first tried to run it after installing the new gear. And naturally enough, I thought my first thought was that it was the gear itself was the problem, and I greased the gear as if I put a little bit of grease on the gear, but that didn't seem to make any difference. Then I oiled the axles, and that didn't seem to make any difference. But then I oiled the bearings of the motor, just with a little bit of gear oil, And also I oiled all of the pivot points of the motion valve gear, including the rods that pump in and out of the cylinders, and that seemed to get rid of the horrible shrieking noise. I mean, it's not exactly silent now, but that's mostly just normal rattling. It's not making a disagreeable shrieking particularly. Still seems to take rather a lot of power to go round, and I haven't put the body back on yet. I did try it with the body on at one point, but then I was having to fiddle so much with things that I figured we might as well just get the chassis running right first, and then worry about trying to put the body back on. And the tender is just passive. The tender's in fact sitting there, but the tender isn't doing anything. It doesn't do anything anyway. There's no pickups on it or anything. Okay, so I suppose we could try to put the tender on. Famous last words. I don't know. Is that going to work? I don't know. Yeah, back wheels don't look as if they're... I don't know. I really struggled to get those back wheels gauged properly. It was a devil of a job to get them to go far enough into that new axle to be gauged properly. And well, they're about right now. They're about 14.5 now, which should be pretty much within range. I don't know. It's been a real struggle for sure, and I'm not all that confident now that the darn thing's going to keep running. Quartering, of course, was also quite difficult, and I'm not sure. I thought I probably haven't got it absolutely spot on. It's basically very close, but I've heard some people say, oh, if you get it as much as 1 or 2 degrees out, it won't work well. You're never going to get it that accurate, I'm sorry. Unless you've got complex instrumentation, you're just never going to get it to within 1 or 2 degrees, I don't think. Whoops. Nearly derailed going over the point there. Suddenly do that when it's been going around okay several times, I don't know, but well, of course maybe something has already derailed and I've missed it. I don't know. Well, apart from anything else, with the old back axle was able to slide back and forth a lot, but this one doesn't. I don't know, it doesn't look as if that back axle's very firmly on the rails, so I don't know how well it's going to run, but that's about all I can do for now. I was trying to run the chassis with the tender hooked up to it at the end there, and it's not surprising that didn't work, as the tender is not designed to hook up to the chassis, actually. The tender actually connects to the back of the loco body behind the back of the chassis. You can sort of force the tender to hook under the back of the chassis, but the pin on the tender won't be able to slide from side to side there, so it's not surprising if things derail like that. Here's how the tender is supposed to hook up to the loco body, providing complete freedom to slide from side to side. So now a bit more video with the loco fully assembled. Okay, so now I've got the body back on and I've got the tender hooked up, and we'll see if we can get the thing to go. Now, it's not surprising, as it turns out, that I couldn't get it to run with the tender hooked up to the chassis without the body before, because the tender is not designed to hook up with the chassis. The tender actually hooks up with the back of the body. There's a pin that comes up on the front of the tender bar that slides into a groove on the back of the body, not on the back of the chassis, on the back of the body. So if you don't have the body on the chassis, you don't have the part where the tender is meant to attach. So you try and attach the tender to the chassis without the body, it's never going to really work properly, because the groove that the pin's supposed to slide in just isn't there. So you can sort of hook the pin under the back of the chassis, but then it keeps jamming. It can't really slide from side to side the way it's supposed to, and the way it can when it's in the groove on the back of the body. So there we are. I'm not saying it's certainly not perfect, it's still a bit on the noisy side, but basically, there you are. It's got its body back on, it's attached to its tender, and its wheels are all sort of running on the rails, so hopefully that's about it. So that's it for the loco, for now at least. The numbers are really too bright compared to the other markings, most noticeably the lettering on the tender. Here's the loco without flash. I did think of redoing the lettering on the tender, but I think I'll leave it for now. I believe the LMS actually switched from gold to yellow around 1933. I didn't realise what a bright yellow these numbers were until I put them on. It's hard to tell with press-fix decals until you actually apply them, as the backing's only partially transparent. At least now the loco actually runs without getting stuck and without undue noise, for the time being anyway. To complete this video, I thought I should just try to get the coaches that came with this set running on the tracks behind the loco. Here are the coaches as they came, not really a train set as such, I don't think. A bit of an odd mixture, in fact. 2 57-foot third-class corridor brakes and 1 60-foot corridor composite. When I took the coaches out of their boxes, which I didn't do until after finishing the work on the loco, I immediately encountered a problem as one of the couplings dropped off. The couplings are of the type with little horizontal jaws that snap round a pin in the pocket on the bogie. I always associated this type of coupling with older Hornby stock. Well, in fact, some Hornby models still come with this type of coupling. But here they are on these Dapol Mainline coaches. At least I assume the coaches are Mainline, and the loco most certainly is. Anyway, in the case of this particular coupling, one side of the little jaws was broken, something I've never actually seen before. I tried to mend it with CA glue. I made a couple of attempts, but I just couldn't get it to hold in the pocket. I could, of course, have simply glued the coupling into the pocket, but that would have permanently compromised the pocket so that it would have never been possible to fit a good coupling in the future. I didn't have any spare couplings of this type on hand, or I would have just fitted one. As it was, since I couldn't get this coupling to work, I simply swapped it for the coupling out of the back of one of the brake coaches and then put that brake coach at the back of the train. So now to finish, some video of the coaches running with the loco. Okay, well I thought just for completeness I should try and get the carriages that came with this set out. There we go. The engine is not entirely happy pulling them, but it can just about do it. A little bit more power maybe. Now these are a bit of an odd mixture. I don't know whether they were ever actually sold as a train set. I bought them together on eBay, but you know, they weren't in a train set box, so they're not necessarily meant to be a set. What they are 2 57-foot brakes, 2 57-foot third-class brakes, I think, and a 60-foot composite. Let's just stop them here. See there? That first coach is a 57-foot third-class brake. And then in between them there's a 60-foot composite, and then there's another 57-foot third-class brake on the back. Now, one of the couplings on the 60-foot composite was broken. It fell off when I took it out of the box. I know this is supposed to be an express, but I don't really want to run it too fast. That's what, about 65% power on the loco. Yeah, one of the couplings just broke right off. They were the old style ones with the little horizontal jaws that clip onto a pin in a box on the coach bogie. And the jaws were just, one side of the jaws on one of them was just broken. I tried to repair it with CA, basically without success. I could of course have CA'd it in place on the I could have CA'd it in place on the bogie, but I didn't want to, because then you'd never be able to change the coupling on the bogie. In the finish, what I did was, since I couldn't get the darn thing to work, I just put the bad coupling on the back of the back brake and swapped the coupling over there. Anyway, so there you are, my little Royal Scot train. Let's take him round one more time, eh? A lot of work I put in money into the engine. Now don't derail on your last time round. Okay, here we go. There you go.